Okay, so we've talked about past tense and future tense. Now let's talk about a new grammar form, an. Let's talk about an. So, an is a very useful little grammar form that's used to negate verbs. So that's used to do things like, instead of saying things like I do this or something is some way, you can use an to say something that you don't do or something is not a certain way. So the example sentence here is 저는 고기를 안 먹어요. I don't eat meat, for example. 고기 is meat, and then this 안 is 안 먹어요. So, how does this 안 work? Basically, you place 안 before the action verb to say that you don't do that action. So 먹다 becomes 안 먹다, to not eat something. 보다 becomes 안 보다, to not watch something. 좋아하다 becomes 안 좋아하다, to not like something. You know this. Oh, good job. So an's very useful. It's very common as well. So let's look at an example. 저는 고기를 안 먹어요. I don't eat meat. 저는 빵을 안 먹어요. 빵 is bread. What is the 를 after meat? This 를 is the object particle. So the object particle specifies that this noun is the object of the verb 먹다. So it's the object that you are eating. So 고기를 안 먹어요 is I don't eat meat. 빵을 안 먹어요. I don't eat bread. 사라는 텔레비전을 안 봐요. Sarah doesn't watch television. And 톰은 사과를 안 좋아해요. 톰은 사과를 안 좋아해요 means Tom does not like apples. All right. Now, there's a little tricky thing about an, and that is that it conjugates differently when you have a separable hada verb. So what is a separable hada verb? We talked about this in a previous live stream where we talked about hada verbs, but basically some hada verbs can be split and some hada verbs cannot be split. And the reason for that is some hada verbs are made up of nouns and verbs. I don't have a specific schedule, I'm sorry. So the verbs, hada verbs that are made of combining nouns and verbs, so that would include like 요리하다, 수영하다, 운동하다. They are all combinations of nouns and hada. So 수영 is to swim, and 수영하다 is to do swimming. And just like you can stick them together, you can separate them. To 수영 and hada, 수영을 하다, 요리하다, 요리를 하다, etc. But not all hada verbs are like this. Some hada verbs you cannot split because they are not made of nouns and verbs combined. They are individual words by themselves. The book is available from Amazon in paperback, or we have PDFs available on our website as well. So if you have a separable hada verb, the an should go between the noun and hada. So 공부하다 is a separable hada verb. So it's the combination of the noun 공부, which is to study, and hada, which means to do. So you should place the an between those two things. 공부를 안 해요. And this little object particle is optional. You don't have to include the little particle, but it is very common to do so, particularly in writing. 공부를 안 해요 or 공부 안 해요 is the correct way to conjugate this verb. If you say 안 공부해요, everyone will understand exactly what you mean. It's not necessarily apologies, my pronunciation is not perfect. 공부를 안 해요. So if you say 안 공부해요, it is still understandable, but this is the completely correct way of doing it. It should go in the middle. So let's look at another one. 운동하다. 운동하다 is the verb meaning to exercise or to work out. So 운동 is the noun meaning exercise, and 하다 is to do. So that when you say I don't exercise, if you want to say I do not work out, I do not exercise, how would we say that in Korean? If we want to say I don't exercise, where does the an go? We have 운동 and, oh, thank you for the cookies. I appreciate that. 운동 안 하다. Yeah, perfect. 운동 안 하다. That's the dictionary form to not work out. And in presentation, yeah, 저는 운동 안 하다. 운동 안 해요. Perfect. 운동 안 해요. 운동 안 해요. 운동 안 해요. I don't exercise. I don't work out. And again, if you say 안 운동해요, everyone will understand you. It's just not like the same thing exactly. It's just not as correct as this one, but everyone will understand. And the last one, 요리하다. What does 요리하다 become when we add 안? 요리 means to cook. So if you want to say I don't cook, how would you say that in Korean? 요리 안 해요. Perfect. Thank you, Anxious Dem. And B as well, that's also correct. 요리를 안 해요 is also perfectly correct. So there's two ways to do it. 요리 안 해요 or 요리를 안 해요. I don't cook. And in any of these sentences, you can add the 저는 to say me. But it's not required. You don't have to say 저는. You can just say 요리를 안 해요. Or you can say 저는 요리를 안 해요. And they mean basically the same thing depending on context. You can, optional to add in 저는 as well. All right. So how would I say, let's look at this example. Mary doesn't study. When do I say when I'm going to go live? I don't have a set schedule. I apologize. I just kind of do it whenever I have time. So Mary, I'll just write it like this. Mary is the person. How do we say Mary doesn't study? So the verb to study is 공부하다, and remember that it is a separable 하다 verb. So Mary, we need to use our particles as well. Mary가, oh yep, Mary는 공부 안 해요 is also perfectly correct. Mary는 공부를 안 해요. Wow, you guys are really good. Yeah, so Mary는 공부를 안 해요. Mary doesn't study. You can also use 가 if you want. It depends on context which one is you should use, but they're both essentially the same in this situation. Mary는 공부를 안 해요. Or Mary는 공부 안 해요. Mary doesn't study. Good job. You guys are very good at this. Okay. Tom doesn't exercise. Tommy or Tom은 운동을 안 해요. Tom doesn't exercise. Sarah doesn't study Korean. 사라가 한국어를 공부 안 해요. Or 사라는 한국어를 공부 안 해요. 가 and 는, they're not the same. They do have differences. But when you're looking at like standalone sentences like this, it's not, you can't really know which one is correct because which one you use depends on other factors that aren't included in this simple sentence. So when you're doing one-off sentences like this, you can basically use either, but there is a difference, and it changes the nuance of the sentence and it changes sort of the context of the sentence. But for beginners at this level, you can use either one when you're doing simple sentences like this. If you want to learn the difference between and ika, there are rules you can learn, and we have a video about that on our page as well. But it's quite involved, actually. I'm not going to do it right now, but ika and ölör. Yeah, that one is you can definitely study that a little bit as well to practice. It is, I understand it exactly, it's very confusing when you're starting out because it just does not exist in English, these particles, the way they do in Korean. But essentially, ika is used for subjects and ölör is used for objects. And we have this subjects and objects in English as well. We just don't use particles to identify them. We use grammatical order to identify them. It's just a very different structure, and so you have to think differently when you're speaking Korean using these particles. But I do promise it gets easier over time. The more you practice Korean, the more you use these particles. And once it clicks as well, once it clicks the difference between subjects and objects, that will really help you. And it just takes some time to get used to. But once it clicks, you're sorted. You're golden. All right. So descriptive verbs, it's a very similar thing. You place an before the descriptive verb. 좋다 means to be good. Oh, I'm going to get some new paper. 좋다 means to be good. So, 안 좋다. 안녕하세요. 저는 한국 사람이 아니에요. 안녕하세요. 저는 뉴질랜드 사람이에요. Okay. Anyway, 좋다, 안 좋다. So, you place the an before the verb, and it becomes 안 좋다, which means to not be good. And when you're speaking in polite or casual polite language, it becomes 안 좋아요. 안 좋아요 means it's not good. I don't like it. It's not nice. 안 좋아요. So, 빵이 안 좋아요. The bread's not good. 수업이 안 좋아요. The class is not good, etc. 맛있다 is to be delicious. So if you want to say something is not delicious, 안 맛있어요. 안 맛있다 is the dictionary form, and in casual polite language, 안 맛있어요. It's not delicious. 재미있다 becomes 안 재미있다. It's not fun. 안 재미있어요. Now notice how these are a little different from up here. Here we were using separable 하다 verbs. These are not separable 하다 verbs. They're not even 하다 verbs. So it just goes before the verb. 안 좋아요, 안 맛있어요, 안 재미있어요. All right. So how do we say... Yeah, and that's a very good point. 안 재미있어요, it's more natural to say 재미없어요, which is the opposite form of 재미있다, 재미없어요. Okay. And 맛없어요 as well. Also, it's not tasty. 맛없어요, 재미없어요 are also good to know. All right, so how do we say the apples aren't good? So, apple is 사과. 사과. And the particle that we need, good job, JQQ. 사과가 안 좋아. So she's used the casual form. 안 좋아 is the 반말 form. If you're speaking casual polite, it would be 안 좋아요. 사과가 안 좋아요. 네, see you next time. 사과가 맛없어요. Oh yeah, that's also probably a good translation. You can translate the apples aren't good to being 사과가 맛없어요, which also is like saying the apples don't taste good, they're not great, like I don't like the apples, that they're disgusting. So when you're translating these things, there's always multiple ways that you can say them. 사과 안 좋아요, 사과 맛 없어요. There's all sorts of different things you can do. All right. And if you want to talk about the past tense, how do we say? If you want to say put the past tense, you put the past tense conjugation on the final verb. So 저는 고기를 안 먹었어요. I didn't eat meat in the past. 고기 is meat. 먹다 is to eat. 먹었어요 is the past tense conjugation of eat. 고기를 안 먹었어요. I didn't eat meat. 사라는 텔레비전을 안 봤어요. Sarah, television, didn't watch. Sarah didn't watch television. 사과가 안 좋았어요. So see the change here. Here we had 사과가 안 좋아요. 안 좋아요 is the present tense, but 사과가 안 좋았어요 is the past tense. 사과가 안 좋았어요. The apples weren't good. And similarly, future tense. 오늘은 사라가 요리를 안 할 거예요. Today, 사라 요리를 안 할 거예요. 요리 is to cook. And remember that 요리 is a separable 하다 verb, so that's why the 안 has to go between 요리 and 하다. 오늘은 사과가 요리를 안 할 거예요. So, today, Sarah will not cook. Will not cook today. 내일은 제가 영화를 안 볼 거예요. What does this sentence mean in English? How do we know if it's separable? That is a very good question. And unfortunately, there's not any specific rule you can learn. There are some guidelines, but on the surface, they look exactly the same. And ultimately, some are and some are not. Oh, very close. But correct. Oh, close. Yes, Peebo's got it. I will not watch a movie tomorrow. Yep, Anxious Den's got it as well. Tomorrow I will not watch a movie. Perfect. Keaton's got it as well. Good job. But yeah, to know the difference between separable and non-separable 하다 verbs, a couple of guidelines you can use. One is that verbs that are descriptive verbs that use 하다, so like 톡톡하다, things like that, are generally non-separable. So if it's a descriptive verb that uses 하다, it's generally non-separable. And if you have a verb that's a loan word, so it's a loan word from Korean or from English or Chinese, for example, like 샤워하다 means to shower. And if it's a loan word like that, they're usually separable. So those are two guidelines you can use, but unfortunately it's not like a clear rule. You kind of have to learn as you go, and the more practice you have with it, the more you'll get used to it. But yeah. And ultimately, if you use it the wrong way around, your sentence will still be perfectly understandable. If you say 안 요리할 거예요, everyone will understand you. It's just not as natural or as correct as 요리를 안 할 거예요. All right. So in this last one, we have the last sentence. 오늘은 제가 술을 안 마실 거예요. So what does this mean in English? So we have 오늘은, which means today. And you may not know what 술 is. You may know what 술 is. But what does this sentence mean in English? Does anyone know? Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to drink today. I'm not going to drink alcohol today.